quite soon after starting the night procession, I understood how much life there was and how much activity. Literally, the forest floor is moving and every square metre is teeming with life. And at the tail end of my life in London, I was so tired of sitting at a computer, not just with emails and stuff, but sending documents and changing files, and for me that was a little bit tragic, because my love of images, my love of pictures and making pictures started to get suffocated by everything around it, the process, and particularly finding myself sitting at a computer. So just before I moved to Sweden, I said to myself, either I'm going to quit photography altogether, or which was I felt absolutely happy to do. I felt I'd exhausted it to some extent, and it had exhausted me as well. I thought either I'm going to quit photography or start from zero, literally from nothing, and I would, as if starting as a kid again, making work for the first time. And so I would have the most basic capture, the most basic printmaking, as far away from a computer as possible, very physical, very tactile, and that was what I decided to do. And knowing that when I moved to Sweden, that of course nature was going to play a very big part in my work. I knew that. I also knew that my imagination would have to work much harder, because in London, it's visually so overwhelming, and if anything, you're filtering out the visuals. But here, because you have this kind of bleak, flat, open land, I knew that I would have to extract something that wasn't always on the surface, and that was quite an exciting thought to me. So when I arrived here, after many walks and sort of familiarising myself with the area in my local surroundings, something struck me, and that was, often I would walk during daylight hours and you would see sort of tiny clues suggesting activity, like intense activity. So you'd see sort of half-eaten mushrooms or gnawed trees and footprints and turned over. So I started to understand that there's such an intense active life here, and during daylight hours it vanishes, and so that of course intrigued me to kind of try to step into this nocturnal world and this intensely busy world, this idea that whilst we're all sleeping there is this other world so it was apparent that this was a big part of this quietness here, and so that's what led me to start the series, which was eventually titled Night Procession. And yeah, I started to often during daylight hours to go to the forests and position remote cameras, but not always. Often I would use cameras in the hand, but and then excitedly go back the next day just to see what had happened. And yeah, again, to my surprise, it was just almost every square metre there was so much activity in life. It was ideal for me because I've lived in cities all my life. I didn't want to arrive in nature and say I'm going to make a body of work. I wanted nature to inform me. I wanted nature to guide the work, and in a way I was just helping it along, but I had sort of half stepped out. Nature was taking control of this whole body of work, actually, and even the palette was dictated by nature. I wanted even the finished prints, so they were very simple capture, very simple prints using black ink, and then I would use plant pigments to kind of, so nature would put its mark, and this lovely green palette was also informed by the surroundings. But I was also thinking of nature photography, or photography, this idea of kind of looking onto or looking into the forest, or looking at birds and animals and plants. And I kept thinking of actually trying to make a piece of work which was looking the other way almost. It was very much from nature's perspective, not from someone looking into or onto. And that was all often in my mind. It was sort of, how could I remove myself almost altogether and enable or help, and to some extent, I was orchestrating the work, but I was also handing it over. I was orchestrating through a way of enabling the work to happen, but in terms of content, I was trying to jump out and the work be very much shaped by what's happening in these forests at night. And I would often think about how we're always looking in the other direction. Often our perspective, our view of nature, you could be in a car and you might see a dead animal next to the road, or on a train you just see a glimpse of a deer on next. So it's often we're looking in that direction, I just kept thinking of this world that just fully encapsulated in that world, and I suppose that was what sort of led me to go to the forests and install these cameras, revisit the next day, and I think also I was almost willing the subject or enabling something to happen it's quite remarkable. But after like a year of doing this, I was often thinking, if I was an owl, where would I sit? Or if I was a deer, where would I drink from? And so I would set up these cameras, and you're seeing the subject actually before it exists, or before it's amazing that what I envisaged started to happen. So I would think, if I was an owl, I would sit there, and then the next day there was a picture of an owl, or a picture of a deer drinking. It's incredible, after a very short while, maybe a year or so, that you start to see and understand where potential things will probably unfold. So that was wonderful for me, because often, when you're younger as a photographer, you're trying to photograph the moment or see, but it was kind of seeing things before they existed, and that was, I really had fun with that in a way. And of course, going back to the studio, then there's the element of surprise, which was one of the things that you enjoy and has excited people with image making, when you process your film or when you see what happened, and that, and quickly, I suppose quite soon after starting the night procession, I understood how much life there was and how much activity. Literally, the forest floor is moving and every square meter is teeming with life, and that, it's kind of remarkable, really. So moving to rural Sweden wasn't that dissimilar than inner city London in a way. It's active, it's intense. My heart was sometimes racing in the forest. I would meet people in Sweden and they'd say, I used to live in East London, or wasn't it crazy or dangerous living in London? And I was like, I'm much more scared in a forest in rural Sweden than I ever was in, I was very overwhelmed in being in these forests. And yeah, night procession, as it was coming to a tail end, I hadn't actually finished assembling the images and editing them, and that too is a very exciting, and in a way, I was talking earlier about the nature making the work, but of course the final body of work, night procession, is still assembled and shaped by me selecting, sequencing, editing. So there is, of course, on one hand I'm saying I'm leaving it all to nature, but of course I'm playing a part as well in kind of weaving the images together, and which is always a stage I really enjoy doing. I tend to work in series, and I love kind of assembling images, and often as well as exhibitions, but I do have my work in book form a lot, and this is something I really enjoy, sort of sequencing and selecting images in book form too. And I was making Night Procession, and during the tail end of this series, I started to think about, probably because I was informed from making Night Procession, that these illusions of things, and the illusion that, as now looking out of the window, this kind of flat open land, this big vast open sky, and I don't know, you realise this is a complete illusion, and to the naked human eye it looks like there's actually nothing going on, but of course that's not true, and as Night Procession proved to me, it's teeming with life, and it's very active.